Hello, people of YouTube land, those that are part of the Cringe Crew community, Discord, those that follow Ted and I on Twitch, and those that are listening to this on a various audio formats and audio streaming services such as Spotify and whatever else we decide to put this into. This is the Cringe Crew Gaming Community Podcast. I am Traductus.
And I'm Ted.
And, that this is probably aliens, but it's aliens. Kidding, we're not doing James Cameron. We're doing we're doing Stanley Kubrick, and this is 2001: A Space Odyssey. If you haven't heard this, even though sometimes I don't consistently Christ.
Yeah.
We're consistently scuffed, but I don't consistently say that the reasoning why we do this podcast, we take a director's filmography and we review it. Since we are waiting for Oppenheimer to come out, we decided to do Stanley Kubrick to finish our time before we finish Christopher Nolan. Check those videos out. Also, you can check the precursor when we did all the James Bond films from the James Bond review podcast. But, which might as well have been, like, the John Glenn ones, because we basically got his entire filmography with the James Bond stuff.
Yeah, and then we added 22 additional fucking films. Just for funsies!
But yeah, we're doing Kubrick, because we figure we're gonna get the Kubrick anyway, might as well, rip the Band-Aid off, but finally we're getting to, like, the hits. So we have 1968's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Obviously directed by Stanley Kubrick, screenplay written by Stanley Kubrick, and author Sir Arthur Charles Clarke. This movie is based off of the short story, his 1951 short story, The Sentinel, and he made a novelization of the movie, in part written concurrently while writing the screenplay to this movie. And as per usual, we're going to talk about casting and development on this. Oh, I forgot. $10.5 million to make this. It had a box office return of $146 million. Released April 2nd, 1968 at the Uptown Theater. April 3rd, 1968 in the United States, and May 15th, 1968 in the United Kingdom. Oh, okay. I had to make sure, like, did we watch this during the fucking, like, anniversary of this shit?
Timing!
But no, slightly afterwards, so... but... we have Keir Dullea as Dr. David Bowman. He returns also. Yes, there's also a sequel to this movie, 2010, the year we made contact. He's in that as well, and I'm pretty sure he's only known for being David Bowman. Apparently he was also in Black Christmas.
He looks super familiar, so it kind of surprises me that, like, he hasn't been in more.
How about David Lisa? Bunny Lake is missing. Yeah, I know. He's like totally like one of those actors that looks like.
I mean, admittedly, he looks like every other 1960s white actor. Like, I get what I'm probably doing there, but also, like, his face definitely looked like I've seen him in some shit. That surprises me.
All these movies I haven't seen except for Black Christmas. Oh wait, he was in The Good Shepherd, but like I haven't seen that in freaking years. So
yeah, I don't think I've seen it at all. So I don't know that I would have seen him in anything other than this.
Yeah,
but he just has that kind of face.
Gary Lockwood as Dr. Frank Poole. She was in Star Trek's No Man, Where No Man Has Gone Before, and his only American film was Model Shop, and again another actor that I guess he did like a lot of TV. Okay, there's a lot of actors in this that are like not really recognizable. I guess William Sylvester as Dr. Haywood Floyd, who's in this. You'll find out why we're kind of in this. Oh wow, he has an uncredited role in You Only Live Twice.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
It was also in the TV series The Saint, which has Roger Moore in it.
We haven't watched those movies in a fucking year. God, no! Stop it! Fuck! I hate it here.
Daniel Richter as Moon Watcher, the Chief Ape Man, and Douglas Rain as the voice of HAL 9000, and he's only known for the voice of HAL 9000, voicing, you know, HAL in this in the sequel. And I think that's about all that really matters of like
this cast was not huge. It was not.
After completing Doctor Strangelove, director. God, there's so many freaking doctors in this that I'm like Dr. Stanley Kubrick now. Director Stanley Kubrick told a publicist from Columbia Pictures that his next project would be about extraterrestrial life, and resolved to make the proverbial good science fiction movie. Biographer John Baxter notes that possible inspirations in the late 1950s inspired Kubrick, including The Forbidden Planet, which, if I remember right, that's the one that's based off of William Shakespeare's The Tempest, which is actually a really good movie for like a 1950s science fiction film. And obviously this is based off of Arthur C. Clarke's The Sentinel. They brought him along to write the script, and then he decided to make like an entire novel of the short story, like a novelized version of the short story. Kubrick also took inspiration from Homer's The Odyssey in this.
That checks out.
And also, Clarke also offered 6 of his own short stories to Kubrick to expand more material for the film's plot. And originally Kubrick and Clarke planned on developing the novel first, but the movie got done first.
I wonder where those other short stories just kind of got injected into the plot. Like, I guess if you've seen this movie, you know that there are very vivid chunks, right? Like the part with the apes at the beginning, and the we'll get into the plot line in a moment, but there are definitely places that you could chunk this out. That I guess, like, now that I'm hearing that 6 other short stories got interjected in there somewhere, like I'm curious to know where those are without having read any of them.
Right. Oh, here's a funny. This is gonna go into while we talk about this movie with like likes and dislikes. Early drafts included a prologue containing interviews with scientists about extraterrestrial life. However, that was scrapped, obviously, which we will get into that. But okay. That's literally what I
Okay. Well, I think that drags us into plot. So this movie is kind of fragmented. The first 20 minutes to half an hour is really about the evolution of man and just kind of establishing a baseline for what happens later on in the movie. There's some
bones break bones.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we discovered tools. Things bash other things. And then we kind of break into like a segment as to like where humanity is at, what their goal is, and what civilization looks like from a 1968 perspective of 2001. Then there is the actual exploration itself. Travelers in a spaceship looking for some mission that at that point is unexplained. So two humans and Hal, the robot. And then
he's the only one that knows the mission.
Right, and then there is conflict regarding the mission and the development of what could potentially be. So we've literally covered the course of human development into where humans could potentially end up, which is crazy to do in 2.5 hours, but also unrealistically ambitious.
Yeah.
Before we get into likes and dislikes like we usually do, though, I think talking about this movie's cinematography is super, super important because, like, in the grand scheme of things, like that's the movie.
It's a beautiful movie.
So
it is a beautiful movie, and this plot is, I guess, mainly told through visual cues.
This movie is so visually stunning. Okay, like.
So far ahead of its time, how the hell this never got nominated for like cinematography or anything like that mind boggles me.
I think that there are pieces, right, that like we kind of look at today and we look back in time and go, man, that was a marvel for its time, right? Like the way that The Wizard of Oz used both black and white and color in the same movie as a transition piece, like how it was storytelling.
It did win Best Visual Effects. It actually did get nominated things. It just wasn't nominated for Best Picture.
Which, okay, reasonable enough. We'll get to that in a moment. But like, I think that a whole lot of this movie is when it was made, how it was made, and how well it holds up. There are visual elements of this movie
that are better than what comes out today.
Right, that they're still good. They're still good.
Like, we bitched about, like, model effects and, like, in previous Stanley Kubrick films, and then also the Bond films, and how, like, some of, like, the model use.
Yeah.
Not to bring up Moonraker again, but, like,
no,
Moonraker was released 11 years after this, and this blows. Right. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey blows it out of the water.
The
sets were really good in that movie.
There are digital elements that are phenomenal that like shouldn't be possible in 1968. The camera work is really good. The lighting is fantastic. The angles,
and it's not even digital. Like that's the weird thing.
It's incredibly well filmed. The visuals are flawless. From today's standards, yeah, you might look at it and be like, oh, it's a little outdated, but you have to consider that this predates the fucking moon landing. Like, it's insane how visually incredible this movie is. It's stunning. I think the place that this becomes kind of antiquated and maybe doesn't hold up for the same viewing experience is the sound balancing of that perfected visual. And I wanted to,
which is weird.
Well, and I think it's important to bring up here before we get into likes and dislikes, because I think Stallman and I are on the same page in that it's not necessarily positive, not necessarily negative, but it is worth talking about while we talk about the creation of the movie.
Because Ted and I don't really know what the hell to think about with the sound, because there's parts where you're just like, well, there's parts where there's just silence.
In previous podcasts, especially Bond, right? We've talked about the discomfort of it just being silent, right? That like it just means like a good music shouldn't necessarily be, loud and in your face and the focal point, but there are certain moments that like if the music isn't there, you notice it because it's not there and it makes you feel uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, and there's not even like sound effects. Like in The Man with the Golden Gun, there was that kung fu sequence where we're just like, well, you figure there would have been like, some sort of like ambient noise in the background as opposed to just like the sound effects of like the punches being thrown, but like
a bird chirping, the wind blowing, something, right? And well, the thing with this one is that I think to some extent it's positive in the fact that like there's the vacuum of space where there wouldn't be noise, right?
And it does increase the anxiety, especially also there's parts of this movie where the only sound effect is just breathing.
And they're using that as a tool, right? Like the moments with the highest tension are the moments where they're like there's a spacewalk and they're out in nothingness, right? Or where the breathing is so heavy because they're doing something covert, right? And that's the moment where there's no background sound, there's no noise. So like it is a plot tool. It does help make you feel uncomfortable, but also just the way that things stretch out, like the length of the discomfort for something that I will personally bring up in dislikes later. I think the stretch of time that you get that weird or prolonged emptiness of sound.
Yeah, especially in the beginning when you're looking at the 8 people. Like, granted, I know there's not going to be any dialogue or any like sound, but with no like background like music or anything on certain scenes, it makes the movie kind of boring
and
on those certain parts.
And two, I think it sits awkwardly only because I think the soundtrack usage in this film is also miles better than anything else we've seen from Kubrick.
Yes,
like the song choices, or the orchestral pieces that are used for music, right?
Which are all classical pieces.
Most of which you've heard in other films as well because they've been repeated a million times.
But which probably starts with this movie.
They're balanced well, they're timed well, they feel impactful when they get used. I mean, like, genuinely, the use of sound in this is very good when they use sound, but the discomfort of not having sound is just a very weird balance to compare it to how masterful the visuals were for 1968.
Yeah, some of the composers used were Richard Strauss, Johann Strauss II, or Johann Strauss II, whatever you want to announce that. Aram Khachaturian and Georgi Ligeti.
I encourage you to go look at the sounds from this movie.
I'm pretty sure it's the Richard Strauss and Johann Strauss the second. Although I do think like Richard Strauss is actually Richard Strauss. He's German, so it's probably Richard. But
either way, like, I mean, you're going to recognize most of the music from this movie. Like, it's big, impactful pieces that have been repeated millions of times in dozens of. Actually, as a matter of fact, the opening scene to this movie, every time you've ever seen space be revealed to you in any fucking movie since probably 1990. Yeah. I mean, you cut out a little bit because it was too.
If you're a wrestling fan,
yeah, you cut out a little bit because it was too high pitched, and I still feel like you get the fucking point. Like, the sound in this is super impactful. I think it just creates some discomfort because it doesn't meet today's standards. So I want to give that a grain of salt before we get into likes and dislikes.
Right.
All right. Now that I've given my fucking spiel, do you want to start with likes? Do you want to start with dislikes? All right, likes it is. I got you. All right.
Thank you, because I don't know.
So one thing that was really cool to me was I guess the
how good this movie looks like.
Yeah, well, visual. Yeah. Let me phrase that once again. I think one of the cool elements of this movie was the conflict, for lack of a better word, between humanity and technology as a focal point for the development of humanity.
Yeah, in the third part. Well, actually, no, not even the third part. All through of it.
Right. I was going to say the whole thing was
because the ape man with the figuring out tools and shit.
Right. The whole thing is like where humanity is at versus what like access they have, right? In the opening scenes, right? Like he's literally found a corpse of another ape. He has a bone in his hand, and he's using that bone as a hammer to crush up other bones. The technology that he has may not be Hal that's piloting his ship, right? But he's using that as like the driving force for them to advance from just where they are to what they can do with those tools to move forward.
I also like how like the monolith is what ties it all together as well. So you have like two different things that are tying it together that progresses the evolution of humanity,
and how they interact with the monolith, right? Because I think that's in the same vein. When the apes get the monolith in the first segment of the movie, they're grabbing it with their hands, like they're hesitant to tap it, then they sniff it, and then they try to bite it, and then they're putting their hands on it, and they're making noise to like communicate that it's not hurting them, right? But that's where they're at in their evolution. And then you get to the end of the movie, and we're literally being sucked into the fucking fourth dimension by it, right? Because that's the technology they have. There's the conflict in the middle of the movie as far as like, you know, he can video chat his fucking daughter for her birthday party that, you know, like it's FaceTime, but 1968 wasn't close to fucking cell phones, let alone FaceTime, right? That like, that's a concept that like where they're battling technology and the struggles is just like how to manage what we have versus what I need to get done, like a modern going to work life, right? You get to the end of the movie and he's battling with the fucking fourth dimension. Right? Or the conflict between like Hal's autonomy and their humanity, right? That like it's insane to me the way that theme can be held the whole way through the movie, and the conflict between the technology they have and where humanity is at to deal with that, and how that develops through the movie, even though the people and the technology are so vastly different from start to end.
I also like certain like scientific things, how they even though a lot of it's probably fantasy, like this movie isn't like hard science fiction, maybe hard science fiction for the time, but like it's enough for like, you know, unless you're like Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you're like someone like Ted and I, you can easily suspend your disbelief on anything on there. And I think like the fact that there is no noise in space, that when they're having like the scenes that are out in space, how there is no sound whatsoever. There's like details where you're just kind of thinking like, yeah, that is a vacuum. And it's like, if something goes wrong, it's not like you can like call out or like make noises or anything, because like nothing's going to hear you. It's all got to be visual. And also like how they sort of set up the fourth dimension at the end of the movie, where spoiler alert, Dave basically every time like he basically sees himself at different stages of his life, from like his current age to him being an old man, and like when he sees himself, he becomes that age.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot of like symbolism in this, right? That like, in the grand scheme of things, without reading the book, I don't know what the fuck that fourth dimension shit meant. Like I can sit here and just be like, yeah, it was kind of cool, but like, for what?
It also makes me wonder how detailed the short story is to all this. Like, what part of, like, how much, what was expanded, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that was part of it, that I wonder where they're interjecting other short stories, but also, like, there's a whole lot of substance here for this to have just been a short story.
Yeah.
I recognize that there's a lot of fluff in this movie, that it was filmed in such a way that made it much longer than you could probably tell the story effectively. But, like, yeah, there's still a lot of content, man. Like,
Yeah, there is.
To describe the apes and their basic evolution, like the very beginning of humanity, right? To establish what kind of technology exists, and then to discuss your mission to Jupiter's moons, and to discuss all of the technology that you have within the ship, and then to personify Hal, and then to discuss entering a different dimension than what is like physically possible within the realm of reach, right? And then to not only like discuss how you're getting to that dimension, but how to establish existing from outside it within it, right? Like the whole thing. I mean, there's a lot of meat. There's a lot of meat. And their ability to take this from a short story and tell like something that's mostly cohesive, I think is really impressive.
That, and also what's I think really interesting is that the only person that's, well, not necessarily person, the only thing that's really fleshed out is Hal as a character. I mean the leader of the apes does have like a progression. Dave does have like a little bit of progression. But like Hal's kind of the only one with like the majority of like the dialogue throughout this entire movie. And
I want to disagree with you really hard, but the way that you phrased it, I guess, like it's hard for me to disagree. I think I'm kind of with you based on the way that you put it. I think for essentially a lot of these are bit parts, right? Like, yes. I wouldn't even call Dave a main character, right? Like, right. And most of that is because of the way the movie gets segmented.
It's just he just happens to be at the end. And experiences a lot of crazy shit.
He's there through half the movie, right? And a lot of the plot progression happens around Dave, but
and it also shows like that Dave is. I mean, for what we kind of know of Dave, he seems to be a little bit closer to Hal than Frank is.
Well, I think like they don't develop him. They don't tell the story through him. They just kind of tell the story that he's in, which is why I say that he's not a main character, right? But if we look back at other Kubrick films, I mean, we've got 7 other pieces, right? That like, if we look at other non-main characters, I think Dave is more flushed out and emotionally balanced than most other side characters.
Right, right.
Like I hate to say that like characters aren't flushed out, because I think Dave's character is there. Especially because of what you get in the 4th dimension at the end, right? But like, you're kind of right. You're kind of right in the idea that like they're not building narratives around these people. They're just like, but I think that the side pieces that they've given these characters also mean more than they have in the past. Which, like, it's why I want to disagree with you, even though I don't.
Right, right. And I totally agree with you. I was just trying to figure out a way to really phrase it, because
I think you nailed it.
Because like for like Hal just kind of seems more like the main character as soon as like his point gets to his, as soon as we get to that point. And I don't know if it's just the calmness of his voice, which is done deliberately.
Yeah.
Well, but
also that they make him feel like the voice is still robotic, right? But they still make him feel human. They give him emotions. The way that they like script his dialogue to tell you what he's thinking, or he acknowledges social cues. Like, that's fucking insane for a machine.
And here's the sad thing is that he's technically the villain of this movie.
Yeah.
Technically. And the sad thing is that you kind of feel bad for him and don't blame him for certain things, because, like, spoiler alert, he tries, there's a computer error, and there's a flaw, and of course the humans, they feel unsafe because, like, Hal controls everything, so therefore there's a computer error. What else is he going to, like, mess up with that error? And with Hal's perspective, there hasn't been a computer of the 9000 series to have any errors. So therefore it must be human error. And for how big the stakes are for the mission, and with how only knowing
Hal's the only one that knows the mission.
knows the huge stakes of the mission, Hal essentially tries to eliminate the human element by killing all the humans.
Hal kills and maroons Frank and then tries to kill Dave.
And the sad thing about this is that when Dave finally is like turning Hal off, like Hal is pleading for his life. And
that's the crazy part to me, man.
And then progressively, and it's mainly like, and to me, part of it's like, is it because the mission is that important to Hal, or is it the fact that Hal just wants to live?
Right. Like,
and
if a machine can talk, like, if a machine's purpose, right, is whatever you've programmed it for, and then it develops the purpose to try and prevent you from stopping it to do a thing that's not what you like, that's so fucking far, man. I said it last night as we were watching, and it was like, man, if it comes down to man versus machine, obviously I'm rooting for man. But there's a fraction of a second in that movie where you just want to start chanting like, "Fuck the humans, go robots!" Right? Like it's insane the humanity you feel for this thing that's faceless, that's all but nameless. Like it's insane.
Especially when he just regresses to like the first thing that he was programmed to. You feel bad for him while he's dying, and despite him like killing all the humans. And
even Dave does, because he allows it. Like he just engages it to just be like, yeah, give me the song you sing to tell me that you turned on properly. It's man. They did so good with the dialogue in that section.
The sad thing is about this is that for how human Hal is, for them to really go through like the entire thing and the humans are thinking very rationally, but at the same time, for as smart and how programmed Hal is, you almost kind of want to think like, couldn't Hal have been reasoned with?
Well, okay, so that kind of brings me towards one of my dislikes, right? I think that so much of this movie was drawn out.
Right. Second.
I think that if you like, if they get to the point where it's like they don't trust the robot, right? Like that, like they recognize the error, they fear for their lives, they recognize that Hal could at any point in time turn against them because it does have the ability to think, right? That like they should be able to do a better job portraying fear or desperation or self-preservation, or something that is still motivating Dave and Frank to do what is essentially Frank's suicide mission, to do like what ends up
to test if Hal is malfunctioning or not.
Right. To even as Dave is unplugging Hal, right? Like, yes, everything's manual, but they're so reliant on Hal that for all intents and purposes, like he's marooning himself. He's stranding himself to the depths of space because he doesn't want Hal to malfunction and kill him. He wants to be in control of himself, right? So, like, it's incredible to me that, like, through all of the time that they stretch out and they pull everything way deeper, that they never really give you that purpose. Which, if we're going to expand out through the rest of the movie, there's no fucking context to goddamn anything.
Please tell me you're holding the sign.
I genuinely have once. I took one note in Sharpie. It covers all of my other notes. It just says fucking context. Where is it? Where?
We don't get context until after everything happens.
But that, is like... Okay, so Stallman and I were kind of joking as the movie was happening, but the longer I sit and think about it, the more it's right, okay? If Christopher Nolan had directed this, it'd be brilliant. Because the main drawback I have to this is that it was linear. Everything happened completely.
If this was non-linear, this would have helped the pacing out great. Because the biggest detriment to this film is the pacing.
So I think about that, like when Frank and Dave are sitting inside the pod, it's the only soundproof place that Hal can't hear them, right? It's where they first start to talk about like how the humans can overcome the machine, how the humans can become bigger and better than what Hal is. If that had been interjected with scenes of the apes again, and that's when he learns to use the tool, like he learns to use the bone as a hammer, right, to crush other things. The symbolism makes sense. But instead what happens is you get the scenes with the apes that are the first 20-25 minutes of the movie. He smashes bones and you hear like really triumphant music, and that doesn't make sense as the metaphor for the rest of the movie until an hour and 25 minutes later, which is incredible. You get the monolith in the scene with the apes, and then they advance 10,000 fucking years to 2001, and then it's an hour and a half from that point before you see the monolith again, and then they barely explain the monolith until after you've already dealt with it, right? Like, I think it's
it's decent. Like, we're not saying the storytelling's bad. Like, it's brilliant, but like how they do it, the pacing, just all right. We have a friend that we've had guests before. We had him guest on the James Bond podcast. That is Xenon. I can't remember the
756.
756. Mike from Cringe Crew. He said that and he still hasn't watched the rest of the film because unfortunately we had to watch this in 2 days. Timing sucks, but before we got to the part where
we were less than we were less than halfway into the movie, and he's like, "Yeah, I haven't even watched this far before."
Yeah, and I don't blame him for that because it doesn't. There's stuff happening, but it makes you for how long and drawn out things are in without context. It seems kind of like nothing's happening. It's like almost like we're kind of watching Spartacus, although we're not.
So I want to sit for a second in the place where they start to fight off Hal, right? Because there's so many times where you literally just cut to a big red lens, which is supposed to be like Hal's visual, right? You can't see the computer program, right? But like what they give you is a giant red lens. And there's so many times that they just sit on Hal over his voice for 10 seconds and all you're seeing is this bright red circle in your face, right? That like, okay, I recognize they're trying to draw this out because it's suspenseful, because it's impactful. It's literally man trying to save his own life by fighting off the machine that's kept him alive. It's fighting off the sentient machine that you have created. Like it is so suspenseful. It's so impactful. But because there's so much just like you're staring at a red lens.
The suspense kind of like...
Are you sure you want to do this, Dave? Are you sure you want to do this, Dave? I think I'm entitled to an answer, Dave. Like, it's just... I know that it's suspenseful. We talked about it earlier in the fact that there's no music, right? There's nothing that's giving you that build-up that's making you feel like it's urgent, but it's quiet that makes you feel uncomfortable, which adds to the tension, but it never feels like it builds. So you're just kind of like... in this whole extended stretch of like, oh my god, he's saving his life. He killed he allowed Frank to die so that he can do the better thing of I think Frank was dead by that point because like his oxygen tube was like cut. So still, like he has given up on Frank to do the bigger thing of cutting Hal off, right? And you get 15 minutes into that scene and you're just like, why the fuck are they all in this spaceship anyway? Like, we all kind of had that sentiment at the exact same time that, like, you're like, hey, they're all here, and I know that it's important because man's fighting machine. This is a really big deal, but why the fuck are they in this goddamn spaceship?
And I was like, I know it's about the monolith because, like, Ted and I have both, like, all the Kubrick movies after this we've all seen. You haven't seen Barry Lyndon, but...
No, but either way, I mean, like, you're right though, is that we've seen this before. We know what's coming. We have the frame of reference. We understand the monolith because we've seen it in the beginning. And why would they just give that to you for nothing? But also, like, we know how the movie ends, right? And still, even still, we were just like, did we miss what the mission was? Right? I'm like, I don't think they told us. And then 15 minutes after we asked the question, 15 minutes after we asked the question, they're like, hey, now that you've done the really important thing of, like, surpassing the climax and finishing Hal off, here's what you're doing here. You fuck, dude. Like, there's no context for anything. And I would love to tell you that that's the only place where it matters, right? That, like, that's the only place you're like, man, I wish I had context. But there are so many places that had they just told the story in a different order, if they had interjected things from the future or from the past into what the active storyline was, that it would have made everything feel so much more important. again, the apes in the first 20 minutes are such great symbolism for the rest of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, I understand that they're like, to watch this with some sense of naivety, right? And to just be like, all right, well, the monkeys meant fucking nothing except they had the monolith at the end, right? And I get it, and I can't tell you that you're wrong. But also, if you spliced those 20 minutes and you took like 2-minute segments and you put them in between when the live story is happening, suddenly they matter. There's a reason for them. The only problem is that they went straight A to Z with no cuts, no breaks, no let's tell you why this is important, let's not make symbolism. It's here's your symbolism. You don't know what it means. Good luck figuring it out by the end.
It honestly kind of reminds me of like these YouTube fan edits of like Pulp Fiction where they like do it linearly. And that movie doesn't work linearly.
Right.
And
I mean, it's the same way that we gave Christopher Nolan a whole bunch of shit that it's like, man, this would be so much worse if you just told it in like fucking Memento sucks if you tell it forward. Memento's great because you can have big picture perspective, see the end before the beginning, and recognize how it can be more suspensefully told, how it can be impactful, right? And I don't mean to disparage this movie. I recognize that it's a fucking masterpiece, right?
This is a masterpiece, and it is a important movie in science fiction genre and movie making in general.
Don't get me wrong, it's so important and it's so good, it's so impactful. Like I get it, it's genuinely a masterpiece, but I feel like the watching experience would be so much better if there was more focus on the storytelling instead of just the visual element of the whole thing, or the perspective element, because just calling it only a visual movie is unfair.
Yeah, it's not. Which honestly comes down to like what's dated about the movie. That's literally kind of dated about the movie, and why I think like a modern audience would have a hard time, being engaged with it. Because I know, am I right to assume that Haley was kind of a little bit like not engaged through like a lot of it, and then finally was?
You're right. I think a lot of that is the fact that it never reaches out to grip you, which is the same thing that we've been talking about. But also, like, I think a lot of the stunning brilliance of this, right, is the fact that it was 1968. Like,
I thought it was at least 1970 or 71. I looked at it, I'm like, 68?
You can go back and watch the first Star Wars movie, right? You can watch what is now titled A New Hope. Right? Honestly, you could probably watch The Phantom Menace, which I'm fairly sure came out post-2000, if I'm not mistaken. Late 90s, early 2000s?
I can look that up.
Okay, while he looks it up.
Keep on ranting.
Yeah, I got you. There are visual elements of this movie that was released in 1968 that are probably better than the, like, prequel trilogy of Star Wars, man. I hate to use Star Wars as the baseline for all things science fiction. I don't mean to sound like that fucking guy, like I'm
99.
Okay, yeah, but 1968, the visuals here are arguably comparable, if not better, than a movie that was released in 1999.
And there's even some like, and I know that some of George Lucas's like visuals in Star Wars, A New Hope. I'm just gonna call it Star Wars because that's how I know it as. Excuse me for being elitist about the Star Wars films.
A New Hope is a very blanket place that everyone understands that I'm talking about, and that's the only reason I use it. But
I was just making a joke for being sounding facetious.
You're good.
But I know like a lot of that came from like storyboards from the unmade movie version, like not David Lynch's Dune, but the guy that directed Holy Mountain and El Topo. I think it's Jodorowsky's the guy's last name. I think it's Alejandro Jodorowsky. But anyway, I know like a lot of like stuff like Alien, which also makes sense because H.R. Giger was supposed to do like the Harkonnen planet for that unmade Dune movie. But I know a lot of that like had like a lot of inspiration for like a lot of like science fiction films, including Star Wars. But there's a lot of like visual scenes of like the spaceship going by in this movie that you see in A New Hope.
I mean, yeah, like, but even even the fact that it influenced those other movies, right? Like think about how influential Star Wars has been for 50 fucking years.
Yeah.
Right? And
it just makes you think how influential this has been. Because Christopher Nolan said, like, the last part, like, where Dave's going through the fourth dimension, like, he had a lot of, like, inspiration for Interstellar. So...
Well, I mean, like, yes, the way that this inspired other people, right? Like, but I'm not even going there, right? The fact that, like, Star Wars inspired generations and generations and generations of science fiction movies, right? Or media, not even just movies. And this looked so much visually better than 2/3 of, like, the largest fucking franchise in science fiction. It's insane the fact that this movie came out in 1968. And I think that, like, if you're not going into this appreciating how somebody in
1968 is able to pull that off.
You've seen visuals from the moon landing, right?
Especially without, like, computer graphics. Like, this is all done with, like, a laser show on, like, probably, like, a black freaking, like, canvas or something like that, or a black painted wall.
Right.
Like...
And like... I made the joke as we were watching last night that traveling into the fourth dimension looks like a fucking shitty remake of Tron Legacy. But, like, honestly, the graphics aren't that fucking different, and Tron Legacy is definitely a post-2000 movie with all kinds of laser lights where 99% of their budget was fucking digital. Like, it's and even then, the original Tron, which was, like, one of the first movies that had those digital, you know, like, graphics and stuff like that. 2001: A Space Odyssey, like, 20 years later, 20 years before, well, actually, probably more like 15, but, you know, a movie that's made in the 80s, a movie that's made in the 60s, this is freaking visually a hell of a lot better. So, the problem with all of this, not to sit here and rave for that much longer, right? But, like, the problem with all of that it is so much better than all of these other things we're naming, is that it's hard to watch it here in 2023 and just be like, this was really good for 1960s, and that's why I like this, right? Like, it's so hard to see that with what we have now. It's tough, and I get it, but it also sucks to have lost that perspective. This movie was so far ahead of its time. It's so phenomenally incredible for 1968 that it was really even good in the 90s. Like, that's nuts.
I think it really helps the fact that we've been watching, like, Stanley Kubrick's previous movies. And, like, none of them are up to the scale. Like, even, like, you figure, like, Spartacus would have, for being, like, a big Roman, you know, battle epic. Or Paths of Glory being a war epic.
Oh my god, the gap between every other Kubrick movie and this feels like this one had to be released fucking post-mortem because of how long it was between. Like, there is so much advancement, dude. Everything... I know that I made I don't remember which Bond movies it was, but I remember making the comment that, like, holy shit, it feels like we advanced 30 years. That gap has nothing on the fucking this one. Like, this is such a fucking incredible movie. You could have told me that this movie was made in 2001, and I would fucking believe you. It's nuts. Yeah, I don't. We need to stop harping on this because I could genuinely go off forever. But like, if you ever watch this movie and you haven't already, please, for the love of all that is holy, go in with the context of when this movie was made. That's all I ask, because I think that you get so much more of an appreciation for it. All right. Do you have any more likes? Because we sat here for a very long time.
No.
Okay, great. I think that brings us into rankings, and today I am making you go first.
You know what? God, this is gonna sound cliche as fuck, but number one. Number fucking one.
I respect that.
I think here's the thing. I think story-wise, that even like you know, Doctor Strangelove, The Killade, and Paths of Glory have better storytelling, but I think as like a filmmaking perspective, and with and I'm not saying that this is a bad story.
It kind of is. I'll give it to you. It kind of is. Like,
the storytelling in this is very vague as opposed to being very detailed. It's more symbolism than anything, which is cool, but that's been done better by other films at the time and a little bit later. However, like, with the visuals, the cinematography, and a lot of like the editing, like, this is a better put together movie than the other ones. If that makes sense. Like, I think there's kind of a reason why most people, when it comes to Stanley Kubrick, they watch this and everything afterwards. And prior to this, no one's really watched, with the exception of maybe Doctor Strangelove and Alita.
this is so hard for me. And
unless you're a real huge like movie buff, then you probably like watch The Killing, because I have a feeling that Tarantino's probably watched The Killing, and that probably had some influence on Reservoir Dogs. But
the reason this is such a struggle for me, right, is that there's
everybody loves a heist.
No, not even that. Like, a little bit, but not even that, right? Like, the difficulty here is that there's such a gap between the movie watching experience and the art form. The storytelling sucks as far as watching a movie goes, right? Like,
right.
If to just watch a movie for the enjoyment of watching a movie, the story sucks. But the visuals, the symbolism, the complexity of man versus technology through literally the beginning of humanity until we break out of 3D into 4D, right? Like that, like all of that is so huge and so big that like there's a gap for me between how complex, how advanced, how way before its time this movie was versus how much it sucked as a viewing experience.
It honestly kind of makes me think of like, God, I don't really want to give him credit, but fucking James Cameron's like Avatar, like the story is dog crap, but the visuals are really good, although it's not as game changing as, you know, this was like in 68, like it wasn't as jarring, but I could picture people back in 68 having the same reaction as like a lot of people did when they saw Avatar.
Yeah, no, I think that's as close as we have as a comparison, but even Avatar isn't 50 years ahead of its time, 40 years ahead of its time. Like, Avatar was advanced, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't.
I think Avatar tried to be, well, this was successful at it, but
I mean, the exponential advancement of technology makes it harder for Avatar to do it. I don't give James Cameron any shit for that. Like, for all intents and purposes, same effect, right? Like, but
And by the way, we're not saying James Cameron's a bad director. We just think he's full of himself.
Fair. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this one second. I think this one was so advanced, right, that it would be very difficult for me to not give it its credit. Right.
Yeah, and I won't knock you for that, because The Killing's a damn good movie.
I think that the difference for me is that The Killing is a much more watchable movie from an entertainment factor.
Yes,
I think,
yes, it is.
I think that if you give this a Space Odyssey all of its credit, all of its dues, I still think that to sit down and enjoy it as a part of its time, it would be much more difficult to enjoy a Space Odyssey than it would be to enjoy The Killing. And I don't feel great about it, but I also could have put it anywhere between 1 and 4 and made an argument that would have made me feel okay. I wouldn't feel good about it anywhere, to be honest with you.
Right.
I don't want putting it second to come across as giving this credit as being anything less than a fucking masterpiece. Because again, this is one of the most brilliant forms of media that has ever existed, so far ahead of its time. The only complaint is that you have to go in with context, because to just, I know nothing, sit down and fuck it, entertain me, it's not going to sit the same as some other ones. Like,
yeah. I totally agree, and that's it. Ella, the next one's going to be a Clockwork Orange.
Oh my god! Look. This is a long podcast. Fuck, dude. This is our longest Kubrick one. Easily, this is our longest Kubrick one.
Barry Lyndon's a long freaking movie, and there's a lot of shit that happens with that.
Because I'm using that to say that I'm warning you that there's a whole lot of substance in the next couple of movies. So fucking.
Oh god.
Be prepared to invest some fucking time into this one.
Yeah.
As always, we want to thank you for watching. You can hop in the Discord with us on Tuesdays and watch more movies with us. We still have quite a few Kubricks to go. 5 of them, I think. And I think that covers our buffer. So we'll probably have 1 or 2 more Kubricks to go. I don't know. Regardless, even after we're done with Kubrick's, we're going to jump into some horror-themed movies that's going to create some fun stuff later on in the calendar year.
Yes.
Fuck it. We watch movies on Tuesdays. Join the Discord.
I'm thinking... we haven't figured out how we're arranging this, but we have like a rough draft. We will announce how we're arranging this probably at least by the time we watch The Shining.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. So within the next couple of weeks, if you're in the Discord, you'll see how we're watching and what plan we have to release things, and you're gonna figure it out. Anyway, if you want to watch movies with us, we do it in the Discord, typically on Tuesdays, but we post in the Discord whenever anything changes. So hop in there if you're interested in watching some movies.
That will be under community events.
Yeah, you can even subscribe to the roll and get added, so you can mute all the other shit in the Discord. I don't care, man. Just come and be involved. It's a lot of fun. The other thing that you can do is you can check us out on all of our other medias. If you're catching us here on YouTube, you can obviously check out the rest of our YouTube videos for some other content. You can also check out both of us streaming. Stallman at Traductus, myself at Ted Green Eagles. Obviously, we love to have you.
Yeah, which I will say it's going to be by this time when this uploaded, I should have my issues with streaming, figured out, but
yeah, plus fuck it, man, life is life. If you're enjoying the content, please come check us on all our other things. We do more than just badly review movies, and everything's gonna be great.
Ed also has a sports podcast as well.
Oh fuck, dude!
Sports here.
Fubo! Yeah, check out whatever stuff you're interested in. We got a whole host of shit for a whole lot of everybody. By the time you're seeing this, we may have even started the second iteration of the music podcast with fucking Mike. Dude, like, there's so much shit to consume. Just find what you enjoy and go enjoy it. We offer a whole lot of shit. Anyway, we love you guys. We thank you for hanging out, for sitting through goddamn near an hour of this podcast, because we're fucking insane people who like to talk a whole bunch of shit. Definitely strongly recommend this movie. Aliens. Anyway, thanks you all for watching, and we will see you all here next week. Thank you.
Yep, later.